Tobey caused No Way Home. For years, fans believed Spider-Man, No Way Home only happened because Doctor Strange cast one dangerous spell. It sounds simple enough. Peter asked for help, the spell went wrong, and villains from across the multiverse suddenly appeared in the MCU. But some fans believe the spell wasn't the true beginning of the story. Instead, the events of No Way Home may have actually started over 20 years earlier with one decision made by Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. That decision came at the end of the very first Spider-Man movie. After everything Norman Osborn put Peter through, killing Uncle Ben's killer by accident, attacking Aunt May, kidnapping Mary Jane, and trying to force Peter to join him, Peter had every reason to let Norman die. Instead, he tried to save him. Norman's own glider ultimately caused his death, but Peter never crossed the line himself. At first, this simply looked like Peter staying true to Uncle Ben's lesson. Looking back, it became something much bigger. That single choice shaped every important decision Tobey's Spider-Man made for years afterward. Peter learned that revenge doesn't heal anything. Mercy is what separates Spider-Man from the people he fights. That lesson became the foundation of his entire life. Its effects didn't stop there. Norman's death shattered Harry Osborn, pushing him into years of anger and obsession. Harry's hunt for Spider-Man eventually led to his own transformation into the New Goblin, setting the events of Spider-Man 3 into motion. Without Harry's obsession, Peter never faces the same emotional conflict that defines the final chapter of the Raimi trilogy. Those events also introduce the symbiote into Peter's life. Peter rejects it before, completely changing him, but Eddie Brock embraces it instead, creating Venom. That matters because later, Marvel reveals that symbiotes share knowledge across universes through a collective hive mind. Suddenly, the Raimi universe isn't just another Spider-Man timeline. It's directly connected to the wider Spider-Man multiverse. Years later, No Way Home brings Norman Osborn back. Once again, Peter stands face to face with the man responsible for destroying his life. This time, however, it isn't Tobey making the decision. It's Tom Holland. After Aunt May's death, Tom's Peter is ready to kill Green Goblin without hesitation. He's angry, broken, and moments away from making the exact mistake Tobey refused to make decades earlier. Then Tobey steps in. He doesn't deliver a speech. He doesn't explain what revenge does to a person. He simply stops the glider with his own hands, silently reminding Peter of the lesson he learned years ago. In that moment, Tom chooses mercy over revenge, just as Tobey once did. That single choice changes the ending of No Way Home. Peter doesn't become the hero who finally got revenge, he becomes Spider-Man. Looking at the entire story this way, Doctor Strange's spell didn't truly create No Way Home. It only opened the door. The emotional heart of that movie was built 20 years earlier, the moment Tobey Maguire chose compassion over vengeance. Without that lesson, the final act of No Way Home plays out completely differently. Maybe Doctor Strange caused the multiverse to collide, but Tobey Maguire caused No Way Home. Venom chose Peter. Most Spider-Man fans believe the symbiote chose Peter Parker in Spider-Man 3 because he happened to be the first compatible host it encountered. But Spider-Man, No Way Home, and Venom, Let There Be Carnage introduced a detail that completely changes that assumption. The symbiotes share a hive mind across universes. That means a symbiote in one reality can possess knowledge from another. Suddenly, Venom recognizing Peter Parker isn't strange anymore. It becomes evidence that the symbiote species has been connected to Spider-Man for much longer than anyone realized. Look at what happens in Spider-Man 3. The symbiote lands near Peter almost immediately after arriving on Earth. It doesn't attach to another civilian. It doesn't wander through New York looking for a host. It finds Peter. Later, when Peter rejects it, the symbiote bonds with Eddie Brock and instantly develops a personal hatred for Spider-Man. That hatred seems unusually intense for a creature that had only known Peter for a short time. Now, jump to Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Venom tells Eddie that symbiotes possess knowledge spanning countless universes. The moment he begins accessing that collective memory, he is pulled into the MCU and immediately reacts to Peter Parker on television. Venom behaves as if he already knows Spider-Man. Some fans believe this reveals something much bigger. The symbiote didn't randomly choose Peter in Spider-Man 3. It was drawn to him because symbiotes across the multiverse already recognize Spider-Man as a uniquely valuable host. In other words, the creature that bonded with Tobey's Peter may have carried memories from other realities where Spider-Man and the symbiote had already crossed paths. This theory becomes even more interesting when you consider comic lore. In the comics, the symbiotes often seek powerful hosts and retain memories from previous bonds. Spider-Man is one of the most important hosts in their history. If the movie symbiotes operate under similar rules, then Peter Parker was never just another random human. That also explains why Venom's obsession with Spider-Man persists even after changing hosts. The connection isn't based solely on Eddie Brock's emotions. It may be rooted in the symbiote itself. The biggest clue arrives at the end of Spider-Man: No Way Home. When Venom is sent back to his universe, a small piece of the symbiote is left behind in the MCU. Marvel clearly intends for that fragment to find Peter Parker eventually. If the hive mind already recognizes Spider-Man across realities, then the next symbiote encounter won't be a first meeting. It will be a reunion. Viewed this way, the black suit wasn't a cosmic accident that happened in 2007. The symbiote had been searching for Peter Parker across the multiverse for years, and every version of Venom may have been moving toward the same destination all along. If these theories are blowing your mind so far, subscribe because the next one completely changes the meaning of Mysterio's origin. Tony created Mysterio. When Spider-Man: Far From Home was released, Quentin Beck was presented as nothing more than another liar. He invented a fake superhero, created monsters that never existed, manipulated Peter Parker, and nearly convinced the entire world he was Earth's greatest defender. But despite all of those lies, one fan theory argues that Beck was telling the truth about one person from the very beginning: Tony Stark. Not that Tony was evil, but that Tony himself created Mysterio. At first, that sounds ridiculous because Quentin is the one who built the drones, planned the attacks, and chose to become a villain. But if you look at the MCU, Beck wasn't born as Mysterio. He was created through a pattern that followed Tony Stark for years. Start with Quentin himself. Before becoming Mysterio, he was one of Stark Industries' brightest engineers. He's the man who invented BARF, a revolutionary piece of holographic technology capable of creating incredibly realistic illusions. Instead of recognizing its potential, Tony mocked the project, renamed it with an embarrassing acronym, and pushed Beck out of the company. To Tony, it was another invention that didn't fit his plans. To Beck, it was years of work thrown away in an instant. At first, it seems like Beck is simply another bitter employee, but then you notice something strange. He's not the first. Obadiah Stane rises because of Tony's reckless leadership after taking over Stark Industries. Ivan Vanko dedicates his entire life to destroying the Stark family after Howard and Tony leave his father behind. Aldrich Killian is publicly humiliated on New Year's Eve and eventually builds Extremis to prove Tony wrong. Adrian Toomes loses his entire business after Damage Control, a company created by Stark, takes over New York. Quentin Beck becomes Mysterio after Tony dismisses him and takes credit for technology he helped create. 5 different villains, 5 different movies, the same name sitting at the center of all of them: Tony Stark. That pattern is exactly what this theory focuses on. For years, Tony believed he could solve every problem by building something bigger, smarter, and more advanced than the last invention. But almost every major technological breakthrough he created eventually fell into someone else's hands. Ironmonger stole his armor. Ultron turned against him. Edith became powerful enough to control an army of weaponized drones. Even Stark Industries repeatedly produced inventions that created more enemies than heroes. Then comes the biggest clue. Tony trusted a 16-year-old Peter Parker with Edith before fully understanding whether Peter was ready to carry that responsibility. Peter immediately handed the glasses to Quentin Beck because he believed Mysterio was the better hero. That wasn't Peter's mistake alone. It was another consequence of Tony believing technology could replace judgment. Viewed this way, Quentin Beck wasn't simply exploiting Tony's legacy. He was its inevitable outcome. Every lie Mysterio told was designed to manipulate Peter, but the reason he existed in the first place wasn't built on deception. It was built on Tony Stark's greatest weakness, his constant belief that intelligence alone was enough to control the future. Maybe Quentin Beck invented Mysterio, but Tony Stark created the man who wanted to become him. Richard finished his work. For years, Richard Parker has been remembered as the brilliant scientist who died before finishing his life's research. Every version of Spider-Man treats his story the same way. His work ended with him, his discoveries were lost, and Peter's powers came down to one random spider bite. But one theory completely flips that idea. Richard Parker didn't fail. He finished his work. The biggest clue comes from The Amazing Spider-Man. Richard's research wasn't focused on creating superheroes. It was focused on genetics, cross-species experimentation, and rewriting DNA itself. Before disappearing, he spent years developing technology that Oscorp desperately wanted to control. Yet despite all that research, the only successful human enhancement we ever see is Peter Parker. That seems too convenient. The film also reveals something even stranger. Peter isn't simply compatible with the genetically engineered spiders. His DNA is uniquely compatible because Richard designed the research around his own genetic code. In other words, Peter wasn't a lucky accident, he was proof that Richard's work actually functioned. Now, look beyond Peter. Across Marvel's different Spider-Man stories, more Spider people continue appearing. Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and countless others all gain remarkably similar powers through genetically altered spiders. The common explanation is coincidence. This theory suggests something else entirely. Richard Parker's discoveries never disappeared. His research survived, evolved, and continued spreading through different laboratories, companies, and even different universes. Every new spider person isn't repeating the same accident. They're unknowingly following the blueprint Richard created years earlier. That also explains why corporations like Oscorp are always chasing the same experiments. They aren't trying to invent something new. They're trying to recreate work that was already completed before Richard Parker vanished. Viewed this way, Richard Parker's greatest achievement wasn't creating Spider-Man. It was creating the future of Spider-Man. Peter Parker wasn't the end of Richard's legacy. He was only the first successful chapter. Miles erased Spider-Man. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse makes it look like Miles Morales simply replaces Peter Parker after his tragic death. It's presented as a story about one hero passing the torch to another. But one fan theory argues something much darker happened that night. Miles didn't just become the next Spider-Man. He may have accidentally erased the original one. The theory begins with the spider itself. Unlike every other Spider-Man origin, the spider that bites Miles doesn't belong in his universe. It was brought from Earth 42 during Kingpin's experiments with the Collider. That means Miles receives powers that were never supposed to exist on Earth, 1,610 in the first place. That tiny detail completely changes everything. When Peter Parker fights the Green Goblin beneath Alchemax, he's already struggling against the Collider. But something strange happens the moment Miles arrives. Peter immediately notices the bite mark on Miles's hand before telling him to run, almost as if he instantly understands what that means. Because from that exact moment, there are now two Spider-Men on one Earth. Moments later, Peter dies. At first, it seems like the Collider killed him, but the theory argues Peter's death wasn't simply bad luck. The universe was trying to correct an imbalance. Spider-Verse constantly introduces the idea that every universe naturally has one Spider-Man protecting it. Earth 42 proves how important that balance really is. Because the radioactive spider was stolen before it could bite anyone, that world never gets its own Spider-Man, eventually allowing crime to spiral out of control under Kingpin and the Sinister Six. Now flip that idea. If a universe can suffer because it has no Spider-Man, what happens when it suddenly has two? The theory suggests reality immediately begins correcting itself. Peter dies, Miles survives. The balance returns. Then across the Spider-Verse quietly adds another clue. Miguel O'Hara repeatedly says that disrupting important events can destroy entire universes. He calls them canon events. While he never directly says Peter had to die because of Miles, he constantly treats Miles as an anomaly whose very existence has disrupted the natural order of the Spider-Verse. That makes Peter's death feel much less random. It starts looking like the first consequence of Miles becoming Spider-Man. The saddest part is that Miles never realizes it. He spends both films believing Peter sacrificed himself to save the city. But according to this theory, Peter may have sacrificed himself simply because the universe couldn't allow both Spider-Men to exist at the same time, which means Miles didn't just inherit Spider-Man's mask, he unknowingly erased the man who was always meant to wear it. Harry was supposed to become Spider-Man. One of the biggest mysteries in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy isn't why Harry Osborn became the Green Goblin. It's why Norman Osborn always seemed more interested in Peter Parker than his own son. Throughout all three movies, Norman constantly praises Peter, trusts Peter, mentors Peter, and even calls him the son he never had. At first, it looks like Norman is simply disappointed in Harry, but one theory suggests something far more shocking. Harry Osborn wasn't supposed to become the Green Goblin. He was supposed to become Spider-Man. The theory starts with Oscorp itself. Before Peter is ever bitten, Oscorp is already experimenting with genetically engineered spiders designed to unlock human potential. At the same time, Norman is secretly developing the Goblin formula to create the perfect super soldier. Those aren't two separate projects. They're two different attempts to achieve the exact same goal. Norman isn't just searching for power, he's searching for perfection. Now think about Harry's position inside Oscorp. If Norman successfully creates enhanced humans, who would logically inherit that power? His own son. Harry is the future of Oscorp, meaning every scientific breakthrough should eventually belong to him. But before any of that can happen, Peter Parker unknowingly changes everything. Peter is bitten first. Within days, Peter begins developing abilities that Oscorp has spent years trying to create. Suddenly, Norman isn't looking at another gifted student. He's looking at proof that someone else has already accomplished what his company couldn't. That's why Norman's fascination with Peter grows so quickly. He invites him into Oscorp. He constantly praises his intelligence. He trusts Peter with conversations he never has with Harry. Even during the Thanksgiving dinner scene, Norman spends more time analyzing Peter than talking to his own son. Then comes the biggest clue. When Norman discovers Peter is Spider-Man, he doesn't immediately try to kill him. Instead, he asks Peter to join him. That decision makes very little sense if Peter is simply an enemy, but it makes perfect sense if Norman believes Peter has become the successful version of the future he originally imagined for Harry. Norman isn't trying to destroy Spider-Man. He's trying to reclaim the greatest achievement Oscorp never got to control. Harry unknowingly notices this throughout the trilogy. He constantly compares himself to Peter because Norman does the exact same thing. Every compliment Peter receives becomes another reminder that Harry is living in someone else's shadow. By the time Norman dies, Harry isn't only mourning his father, he's also losing the life he believes Peter stole from him. Viewed this way, Harry's transformation into the new Goblin isn't simply revenge for Norman's death. It's the tragic result of watching another person become the hero he was always expected to be. Peter didn't just take Harry's best friend, he accidentally took Harry's destiny. That completely changes Harry's role in the Raimi trilogy. Instead of becoming a villain because he hated Spider-Man, Harry becomes the fallen version of the Spider-Man he was always meant to become. Peter Parker didn't create the Green Goblin. He may have created the Spider-Man Harry Osborn never got the chance to be.